Okay.
Oh, leaf pickup,
Okay, here
that's
we
a
go.
biggie.
So welcome, everyone, to the this continuation of the December 11th Wenham Selectmen's meeting. We had an executive session earlier this evening and are now ready to open the meeting for its open session. At the beginning of the meeting, we usually take input from folks for items that are not on the agenda. I feel like, unless these two little guys want to say something, everybody here is on the agenda. So we will move to, announcements. Gosh, I have announcements. That would be me. Announcements. We have 4. First one is curbside leaf pickup update. I was interested to read that the DPW is actually having time to begin their second round of loose leaf collection. They'll follow the schedule route posted on the town website, where daily status updates will be provided. The DPW will make every effort to complete a full second round of loose leaf collection, weather permitting. Contact the DPW with questions, 978-468-5520, extension 6.
The weather has been in their favor.
Of late,
Right.
the last couple of weeks.
A month ago, no.
So they have Arbor Street tomorrow, and then they're going to do parks and cemeteries, and then they'll start the second round. So it's weather permitting, end of this week, beginning of next week for starting the second round.
Okay.
But I do have a comment on that. So I've noticed that some people have only put out their leaves in the last 3 or 4 days. So I think next year, and particularly if we don't do a second round, these leaves are going to be there till spring. Okay, and if we're not going to do a second round, or even if we are going to do a second round, I think next year when we say there's a leaf collection, all leaves have to be out by a certain date.
I guess as long as we know the general order that they're doing them in. Because if you're last, even if you're
That
last
gives
in
you
the
another
first
couple of
round,
weeks. Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm afraid they would just blow away, unless they have to cover them or something.
And we did talk about potentially changing the route next year.
Yeah, it shouldn't be the same people who are last all the time.
Yeah,
I got that email too, but
But you're right.
what if somebody put them out next week?
Yeah, well,
There's nothing in,
No, that's nothing
they'll
saying
come
that
by
they-
again. They're, well, and this, now if it snows out and the plows have to plow the streets,
yeah.
it's going to be a mess.
Yeah.
And that, I know that prior to this past week or 10 days, we had a lot of rain, so that I got it, that they're blowing the leaves out there. But at some point, you either have to give up or get somebody to do it for you, or not put them in the street. And some of the piles I'm noticing are 2/3 the way up to that divider there, so that.
And they have finished their first round.
They
So if
just
there
have
are
now.
leaves out today, there are people who are expecting a second round.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just think
Jack's
next
point,
year that we should have
make sure people understand.
a date that
Date
it's
to
inappropriate to
have
put,
by.
you can't put your leaves out beyond a certain date. Or something, somebody could be putting leaves out next week.
Not to bury the lead, but I think for our FY20 budget discussion next week, I think we may be talking about loose leaf pickup.
Oh,
Really?
Yes.
Loose, what does that
I won't
mean?
be
My
talking
favorite
about
subject?
loose leaf. You guys go at it, have fun.
What does that mean?
Well, Jack's not going to be here.
It's,
I've dealt with it before.
Yeah, I understand.
I was a
me
solo.
too.
Should we pick up leaves? Is that-
Yeah. For the budgetarily, I have a feeling we're going to hear about it as a possibility for.
I have to run for re-election this year.
Right, so I'm with you, Jack.
So Jack, you're going to be
on the truck this year.
available next week's meeting, correct? So-
Yeah, I'm not excited to have that discussion. But anyway, moving along on the announcements.
Right.
The annual Town Hall Holiday Open House is
Yes.
December 19th, Wednesday, a week from tomorrow.
Yep.
Wow. December 19th, from 3 to 4:30 p.m. All residents are invited to celebrate the season with us, the selectmen, town staff, on Wednesday, December 19th, from 3 to 4:30 for annual Town Hall Holiday Open House. Refreshments will be served here in the selectmen's room. Please RSVP with Nikki. So we're asking folks in town.
Yeah, but I don't think we're going to be locking the doors.
No, it's
It's certainly
Right.
an open house.
It's an open house, but it would be nice if folks came.
Please, we want you
More
here.
More than the
More than
3 or 4
usual.
that come, the
Yeah,
usual
it's nice
suspects
people
come.
to know that they're
We know who, I can
welcome.
list them right now. Yeah.
Town Hall holiday hours, important maybe. Town Hall will be closed December 24th, 25th, 31st, and January 1st in observation of Christmas and New Year's. Town Hall will otherwise be open during regular business hours and open until 4:30, which is later than usual, for the first 3 Fridays in January. I'm imagining that's on the website, or will be. And lastly, we have actually Diane Bucco here, Town Clerk, to give us an update on the annual census. Thank you, Diane.
This woman is everywhere, all the time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
I don't know if I
know
need
it's
that.
one of your favorite topics.
Yes, census. It's the holiday season, so in Massachusetts, I'm here to remind you that that means census. And I say Massachusetts because I believe that Massachusetts is the only New England state that does an annual census. We may be one of the only nationwide, but I'm not sure about that.
Is that noisy?
Massachusetts has been doing an annual census since the 1600s.
So this is separate. There was a census done, I don't know, 2 months ago, something like that. They came right to my house. I actually spent time with the woman, went through the whole thing, and asked questions. But
That
must
might have been the
federal.
American Council ACS, the ACS.
That's federal, though, right?
That would be part of
That's
the.
federal, that's biannual.
part.
So you're saying,
It's
I
the
didn't realize the
biannual
state did a
ACS?
separate census.
The state does the census every year. That's that little form I send out every year. We send it out the day after Christmas, December 26th. It's due
Okay.
back to my office as soon as possible. It collects the names of all the residents and the birth dates of everyone in the household, veteran status, and number of dogs. It's basically all it asks for. It's a very easy form to fill out. You can return it by mail, by hand, or email. So I just wanted to remind everybody to do it. A lot of people always ask why. Why do I have to do this? I do it every year. I pay my taxes. Why do I have to do it? My office has nothing to do with the taxes. The annual census is only
Did I just say that
collecting this
again?
information, and this information in my office is used to make the voting list and the street list. So our voting list, if you don't return the census, makes you an inactive voter, makes you slow down on election day to fill out some forms. The street list is your proof of residency, if you would need it for state tuition, other education, veteran benefits, whatever it might be. The third part to the street list that's important is that it's very useful in genealogy. I know it doesn't sound like much unless you're into that stuff right now, but the fact that we can go back to the 1600s and proof of residence for people in Massachusetts now looking forward, this is a great thing to have. So
But the
it's-
federal census, I'm into genealogy. It's the federal census every 10 years. It's really people who are into genealogy go because it,
Well, they start there, but then then they have to find out exactly where they are in Massachusetts.
But the federal
Is
census also
Salem or Wenham or,
they list your address in the federal census.
yes.
And the number of children, number of people in the household, the employee, actually the questions vary from every 10 years. They're not quite exactly the same.
Right.
But what is consistent is the street address.
Unless you move within those 10 years.
When they take the census in the 1910, every
Yep.
your street address is always listed in there, even though they might change some other questions. The
Right.
street address is always in that,
Right.
along with the number of people in your household. And other questions, do you have a horse or not? That changes.
So, yeah, right, whether they ask you that all the time.
You use the information about the number of dogs to help enforce dog licenses as well? I guess that was.
If you write that you have a dog, then I'll remind you that you should do your dog license.
Cool.
And so that was it. So I just wanted to remind everybody that that census will be going out in Wenham again, December 26th.
Okay.
Oh, the other question people always ask is, why do I send it out during the holiday season?
Because you have nothing else to
You
do.
got extra time to do it.
Hanukkah's over.
I send it out because I do it in conjunction with dog licenses. So it's a mass state law that we register our dogs every year. It's a town bylaw that we register our dogs from January to December. It's a town bylaw that says there's a $25 late fee starting February 1st. So I want to get all the information to all the dog owners early so that they have a full month to register their dog without that late fee.
As a dog owner, I appreciate that.
Well, you're very welcome. We are also having the contest for the cutest dog again, so make sure you take some good pictures.
Yeah.
Date stamp photo submissions.
What?
Date stamp photo
Date
submissions.
stamp, a current photo, 4x6, no bigger. And I think that's it.
Well, while you're up here, I would like to take just one moment, Madam Chair, and commend Diane, Peter, Catherine Tinsley, and so many others, Jackie, who performed and put on a mock town meeting last week.
That was
I
fun.
thought that was fabulous.
Very well done. Jackie has to take all the credit for that. The 375th committee was behind her. It was her idea. She put it really all together. I surprised everybody with the costume. That was completely on my part, but it's all
So didn't
Jackie.
Catherine Tinsley.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty exciting, too.
But it was
But it really was
it was a great event, a
The-
great way
the-
to end the year.
It
Yeah,
was.
the authenticity
It was very fun.
that you went back to, and having participated in many town meetings myself, I was just fascinated with the subject matter and how everybody handled themselves. So for those who made it to this presentation, I'm sure you saw the same thing I did. For those who didn't, I hope we can do this again sometime.
Okay.
25 years?
Maybe for our 400th?
400.
I think it was supposed to
think
be
it was-
streamlined, or live streamed.
Streamed, yeah.
But I don't know exactly
There was a
what.
video camera up in the
Yeah.
loft. There were videotaping
I think the
it,
church
and there
was
a
videoing, yeah.
Yeah.
We even had
Regular camera.
our town
moderator.
moderator who has left the area and came back and was present and was town moderator for this meeting.
Very nice of Trudy
And the
to
Reverend,
offer
and I
her
found out the most
to him.
important work of town meeting was to make sure that the minister, the church minister, was in place. And the second most important thing was to affirm the compensation, was it 44?
Some amount of wheat and
Shillings.
All I
something.
know is I gave him one of my calves.
Something like
That's all I
that.
know.
Gave 'em all your
And
gifts.
part of it was in Indian corn, and we didn't have enough Indian corn. You guys did a super job.
But there was that one resident that wouldn't share his animals.
Right, right.
Right.
Yeah.
It was well done.
And very well attended.
So
And
thank-
well attended.
thank
It was a
all.
great 375th anniversary. The whole year went really well.
Was. And a nice,
Really did.
nice event to close out the celebration.
Yeah.
And for folks at home, this 375 lighted, the lighted
Numbers.
sign outside of the town hall is moving across the street for the church, who will be 375 in 2 years.
Next year.
Next year, in
Oh, next year, I'm sorry,
2019.
next year.
2019. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We will be looking for our census.
Can't wait.
Okay, so I think now we can actually move it up. So I'm, with everyone's approval, since we have some guests here, who I'm pretty sure are here for new business and our annual liquor license renewals, I'm going to skip through the agenda up to new business C,
All right.
which is John's.
That's me.
And
Okay.
starting with fresh foods.
Madam Chair, we have 3 annual liquor license renewals. 2 of them are present, and I'd like to see if we can bring them forward one at a time to recognize their liquor license renewal. So we have Fresh Foods first, if that's all right. Mr. Kian?
Wayne.
Cohen?
Yeah,
Used to it. Good evening. Thank you for having me.
thank you. for
Before you start, I'd like to let everybody know that I've reviewed all of the requirements, and you have everything properly filled out, and payments made, et cetera, so police reports, and there's been no
And
fight.
fingerprints now.
Now,
Yeah.
was
we
really
heard
great.
about that last week,
Yeah, I got a private tour of the police station. It was nice.
Nice, right? Yeah.
so please.
Thank
go
you
ahead.
for doing that.
Thank you for having me. We're just here to renew our annual liquor license for the Wenham Tea House at 4 Monument Street. In the past year, we've had great success and past 7 years at this point, with no issues with our liquor license over there. So we're just looking to renew it once more so we can have some mimosas on Sunday with you all.
There you go. 7 years.
We haven't heard of any brawls or
No, it doesn't happen too often at the tea house, I must
I
say.
came over for breakfast last Saturday. It
Oh,
was
awesome.
Very, very nice.
Excellent. Sorry I missed you.
It's all right.
Well, it's-
You're a busy
it's a-
man.
Yeah.
It's a nice place to have in town.
Thank you so much. It's nice running it, and it's nice being supported by the townspeople.
Okay, so.
So it should be your
where
first
did-
yellow,
the
first
first
yellow
Oh,
tab.
the first one.
They're all yellow. Because we have different colors.
Yep, okay. All right. Having met all the state and local license requirements and paid all fees, I move the Board of Selectmen renew the all-alcohol beverage restaurant liquor license held by Fresh Foods LLC DBA Wenham Tea House located at 4 Monument Street through December 31st, 2019.
Second.
Any further discussion? Questions?
No. Doesn't look like
All
anyone
those
has
in
a-
favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and thank you for the expedition on the agenda. I
Yeah,
appreciate
no
it.
problem.
Thanks for
Although,
bringing the
I'm
young company.
It's bedtime.
very impressed. I'm pretty impressed.
Thanks for.
I think there could be some treats somewhere in the building. I won't say anything more than that, at your discretion. Okay,
All right.
so I guess
We
we
next have the 97
Aye.
Market. Come on up, sir.
So we're, just for everyone's sake, we're postponing the second license that's on our agenda that people can see, so the people understand that we're not doing,
I mentioned it's
Yeah.
2, not 3.
but it's Grassy Roots that we're not doing because she's unavailable. Okay,
Hi, my name is Albert Abdelmalek. We'd like to renew our license for next year. I mean, we don't have any issue for last year, which is a good thing.
Well, as I said about your predecessor, I've gone through all of your paperwork, you've met all the requirements, and, we've heard no complaints, so that's a wonderful thing. I'm sure you're happy being able to do business. And
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Thank you for being here. All right, having met all state and local licensing requirements and paid all fees, I would move the Board of Selectmen renew the wine and malt beverage retail liquor license held by 97 Market, Inc., located at 143 Topsfield Road through December 31st, 2019.
Second.
just, if I may, I just want to thank you. I know that you've been very cooperative with things that we've done in town, and certainly the neighbors are happy to have you there. Not heard a complaint, so thank you for,
Thank you very much.
A good neighbor, that's
That's
a
a big
tough
thing
spot.
I always looking for if no complaint.
right.
the biggest
And we
deal-
hear them if there are.
The biggest
Yeah, I
deal
know.
at one time was the time the dumpster was being dumped,
Yes.
like 4 in the morning.
But Albert took care of that.
Still?
Toot's
Take
Sweet.
care of that.
Years
Is
ago.
this complaint still?
No, no.
No, no, no,
Oh,
a
that's
long
That
time
was
ago.
Yeah,
one
that's right.
time
That was the
there
Yeah.
was-
only thing I can ever
That's right.
remember.
Right.
So you've been a great model citizen, so
Mhm.
thank you.
So that's
You're
my.
welcome.
my
Thank you
only
very
comment.
much.
All right.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so we're ready to vote?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming by.
Thank you.
All right, so we will
Don't bump into the crowd on the way out. though.
Yeah, no.
we will reassign Grassy Roots to a time when she can make it here.
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you, Peter.
Yep.
Okay. I'm all
Okay,
set.
so we're going to jump back up to the agenda to reports. I don't believe there's a town administrator's report.
There isn't a formal report, and then I had some late breaking news this
Okay.
afternoon that is worth sharing.
Now's
A
the
couple
time.
things. First is I heard from Representative Hill this afternoon that the House today approved the Longfellow Road Special Act.
did.
Yay.
So one important step down.
Yeah.
Expect the Senate to take it up later this week.
Great.
So, and they have their legal counsel has already vetted it, so, and gone through the 3 readings and everything else. So hopefully that'll get approved by the end of the week, and then it'll be on the governor's desk. So I'm hoping in a week or so, I should be able to share out that has finally been
Yay.
approved, and then we can start work on the solicitation for engaging the engineering firm and putting the project out to bid.
Fantastic.
Couple,
Feels like forever.
it does. A couple other updates. Just talking about events from the past week. Toys for Tots. The fire and police departments did their fundraiser on Saturday.
Oh, yes, that's
and-
right.
And that got a report from both chiefs. Well attended.
Oh, great.
They filled up both the cruiser and the fire truck. So thanks to all the residents for donating toys to that cause, and for the fire and police departments for putting it on.
Yeah, our police chief said to me, yeah, I'm going out there to get them to open up their wallets.
Yeah.
Good for you.
It's a nice thing. It's really Nice.
And then finally, and more on this, your board meeting next week, I would expect, but we had put out there after our meeting with residents about the Main Street traffic project. We had really tried to solicit resident feedback. We'd given kind of unofficial deadline of yesterday for initial comments to be sent in. Got about, heard from about 20 residents by email.
That's
So
quite a number.
Yep, so some pretty, a good sense of what everybody, questions, comments, support, and some follow-up items from that. So probably at your meeting next week, I'd expect to have kind of a summary of some themes that we heard, and a review of an initial scope of work for the engineering firm to really talk about next steps and how we want to handle that, and timing and funding and so forth. So more on that to come, but I thought it was really, I think, positive that we got the amount of feedback that we did.
Yeah.
I think the article in the Chronicle didn't hurt in terms of getting the word out there.
Right.
And that is it.
Did I remember that you had?
Yeah, or Jack, since you were at the Veterans meeting today, it was, why don't you break in and talk about Wreaths Across America, because that's a big deal.
Yes. So this Saturday, there's across the country, but in Wenham here, we're going to celebrate the Wreaths Across America. My colleague to my right here has volunteered to house, how many do we have, John?
1,000 Christmas. Oh, I'm
For
sorry.
Wenham.
Oh, for Wenham is doing 200, and Hamilton is doing 800 because they're a bigger population.
That was a little less than 200 but for Wenham, but all right.
Yeah, it's right around 200.
Okay.
Yep.
So we're having a ceremony at the main original cemetery up the street here in Main Street at noontime, where we're going to put as many wreaths as we have. John said just a little under 200 on approximately half of the veterans' graves in that cemetery, beginning with the oldest veterans there, and there are 2 from the French and Indian War, I learned this morning.
Wow.
Wow. And that and they go up.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
It certainly was 1783, I'm told.
Wow.
And that I'm not an expert on that. And that so we're going to have some remarks as well as the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts following 7 captains, zone captains, to put wreaths either laying up against the stone if it's upright, or on the surface if it's a stone that's in the ground. And that we hope to have somebody play the same girl from the high school who did the bugle thing for our selectmen's meeting. Remember, she went in the other room behind there?
Oh.
There's a name for that.
Yeah.
She's,
Taps.
yeah, well, there wasn't taps at the selectmen's meeting, it was something else. They call it the lone, I don't know.
Remembering that.
Pardon me?
I don't even remember that.
Well,
Was it before my time?
just last selectmen's meeting.
Oh.
The young lady went into the back where, and you couldn't see her, you only can hear her.
Ah, cool.
I guess it didn't make much impression on everybody. But anyway, so that it should be a good ceremony, and we're pleased to participate here locally, along with everybody else in the country, for our veterans, which is very, very important. The Veterans Committee, which I'm a member of, has spent a lot of time organizing this. Unfortunately, the weather is not conducive. It's supposed to rain, but we're going to have it rain or shine, so if it's raining out,
Bring your umbrella.
The
bring
reason
your
they
umbrella.
wanted-
Don't expect, they'll postpone it. No, we're not going to postpone it. And that might shorten the remarks somewhat, but and we're all looking forward to. It's not going to be a lengthy thing. It's just time to honor basically the veterans, and that it's again. My colleague to the right here is graciously offered to house these wreaths. You're going to get them tomorrow morning, right?
No, they came in
They came
today, this morning,
Yeah,
on
it's
the
gonna house them
tractor
in-
trailer marked Wreaths Across America.
It's a big tractor trailer. I'm
This
told, too.
this was a 53-footer. There was 100 feet of truck coming in.
Wow.
And we were one of 4 or 5 stops he was making just with wreaths.
It's very cool.
So yours truly will be there, and that I presume all of us are going to be there, the selectmen, and that with our raincoats probably, and that we hope to make this an annual tradition, and I hope to raise enough money next year to put wreaths on all of the veterans' graves in ensuing years as well. So that I look forward to seeing and bring the family, and. It's a way to honor veterans, so that.
Yeah. And this is all in tandem with what happens at Arlington National Cemetery at the same time on the same day.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal for a lot of folks. And I understand there's 9,500 being shipped to Normandy, and those people in this country who wish to help out distributing them on the Normandy cemeteries are costing themselves a trip over there, and
It's pretty impressive.
I'd like to go, actually.
Pretty impressive. So that's it.
Thanks,
Wreaths
Jack.
across America.
You're welcome.
Okay,
Thank you for all your work, John.
yes, and
Yes.
thank you.
everyone
You guys
involved.
did a great job.
So the next thing on our agenda, if we're done with reports, is our consent agenda, which Jack has.
Yeah, so I have a motion in front of me. It doesn't seem quite right, though. I move to approve all remaining items. Why is the word remaining in there?
I'm guessing it's because we have an
Always.
opportunity to remove items if we
Okay, well,
chose
not-
to,
okay.
but we're,
So I
since
move
there's
that we
only
approve the
one.
consent agenda.
Yeah, we have some from that date that we already did
Yeah,
a week
this
or
is
two
not
ago.
right.
I think you can just take out.
It says set three, that's right, with
Yeah,
set
so it's
three
just-
of the, yeah.
You could just take out the word remaining.
Yeah.
Everything else.
Yeah, it's
All
the
items.
Yeah, all items.
executive session meeting minutes from October 23rd, and the renewal of members of the 375th Committee, which, am I supposed to read the names, or
Nope, you don't have
You
to
don't
on the
have
consent
to.
agenda.
consent? There you go. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye,
And
something like that.
Yeah, did we have a second? Second.
Good job.
The consent, you're supposed to rush it through.
So,
I don't know.
the only other thing I guess I would add is that we're holding those minutes. We're approving and holding set three, or the third executive session
Of the
Correct.
October 23rd.
on October 23rd. Okay, so I'm gonna make sure that's what we were doing. Okay,
Just a quick note, Bob Hicks is stepping down from the 375th Committee. He was a great help for his time over the past year, but he's actually, this is just a 6-year appointment, a 6-month appointment.
gonna say,
Six
what?
years.
6-year appointment.
We got a 6-year birthday going
my
on.
Right.
attention there.
Yeah. And Bob's actually shifting his focus to help Jim Reynolds out with a refresh of the COA newsletter. That's right in Bob's wheelhouse, having, written the Messing About in Boats
Yeah.
newsletter for many, many years.
Yeah.
So he's going to be helping
That's
Jim out
great.
with that.
That's
and
great
so
for-
that's
Yeah.
why
for
he's
Jim.
stepping down. So thank you for your service, and thank you for your continued help with the
Yeah,
town.
just mentioning Jim Reynolds and the Council on Aging, they had their annual holiday party today at the Hart House. I haven't been there in a while, and it was very well attended. I bought 7 raffle tickets, and I didn't win it all, but the person on my left won, the person on my right won. I guess I just got the right,
You just lucked out, Jack.
And that it was a very inexpensive meal. I think they only charged $15. And turkey, stuffing, salad, dessert,
Open to all
anybody.
Seniors?
Yeah,
Seniors, yeah.
yeah. I
missed
think even people who weren't senior probably could have
Yeah,
come. So Jim did a good job as usual, and so did his assistants, and that, so it was just a nice time for people to get together, and that obviously most of the people there were seniors, other than staff.
Yeah. Senior's not that senior anymore for me. It's just funny how that changes.
Well, if you went to this Hart House today, you would definitely know they were all the seniors, just trust me.
Okay. Okay, so we have our consent agenda. We've already done letter C under new business. We're moving right along to letter D under new business, which is a review of the preliminary FY20 budget. It is my agenda item, I think, and I'm going to pass it right off to Peter.
Okay.
I love to be able to do that.
So we had our department head presentations all day, or 6+ hour workshop session on Saturday, December 1st. And so the idea at this point is to now circle back and have a discussion about getting some policy direction or from the board, or trying to find what additional information the board would find useful to help give that policy direction. Probably would be helpful, especially since that meeting wasn't televised, for me to do a high-level review of status.
Sure.
Makes any sense?
Sure.
So when we,
Did you publish anything on the website at all?
what's that?
Is this, any of this on the website?
All of this material is on the website in the packet, including the updated roll-up, but not the entire budget book.
No, but I'm saying if people in town, and you prefaced your remarks by saying that, it wasn't televised, but if somebody really wants to get into the weeds here, more or less, they can go on the website and see all this stuff.
Yes, yes, this is all posted in the packet.
That was my
that's up
point.
on the website. Yep. So, when we had our original discussion looking out over the next 5 years, but specifically for FY20, when we did our forecasting, when we started the budget process in September, we had originally projected I think, $150,000 deficit or over the levy limit, based on just our very early projections, looking at prior year actuals and contractual obligations and so forth. Over the past few months, we've been meeting with department heads. I should rewind a little bit. Coming out of that process, the Board of Selectmen gave some policy direction to the department heads in thinking about putting together a FY20 budget, which was, again, looking at level services, but also asking for, any pressing, compelling departmental needs that they felt needed to be addressed with, supporting documentation, rationale, and so forth, if there were any of those requests. So department heads put together their initial budget requests. They then sat down with Patty and Jackie and I and went through those requests. We did some further refinement, asked for some backup, and so forth. So there was, with several department heads, there were a couple meetings. And then that culminated in the preliminary administration budget that was reviewed at our meeting on December 1st. And so at a very high level, where we stand now versus based on our initial projections, where we were originally looking at being about $150,000 over the levy limit for FY20. Now we're looking at about $425,000 over the levy limit, which is substantial. Obviously, this is actually a little better position than we've been in at least early on in the budget process, the past few fiscal years. And as we'll go through, almost all of the $425,000 are for either new staffing requests, some compensation adjustments, new expense requests, or capital requests for FY20. The total of all of those is just about exactly $425,000. So just to go through real quick on the revenue side, how we're building the revenue side of the budget for next year. New growth, we're projecting 100,000 more than we have the past several fiscal years. So where it's been $100,000 the past several, we're increasing that up to $200,000. That's based on some of what we've seen for actuals over the past 3 fiscal years in particular, which has been on the order of $200,000+. Not that much more above, but 200 at minimum. And there's also a couple of pretty significant projects in the pipeline that we expect to see some additional valuation increases from. Our FY18 new growth, we had budgeted at $100,000. Our initial projections all had that coming in at almost $500,000. As of today, that number is probably going to come down. We will know, I would expect, in the next 24 hours or so definitively what that number is going to be from the Department of Revenue. But that will likely change and likely decrease. So we can talk more about that at our meeting on Thursday, and then again next Tuesday, I would expect. Free cash, we plan to now apply $700,000 to build the operating budget for FY20. That's based on certified free cash for FY18, just under $1 million. We have the policy where $250,000 at minimum is set aside, and we are just looking at a little more than that now at this point. Ambulance revenues, as we've talked about the pilot program, we had been very conservative in budgeting for FY19 at $35,000. We're looking to increase that to at least $100,000 for 20, and that may go on up a little bit as we continue to see what we're billing out in the months ahead. But that program seems to be bringing in, the revenues that we're seeing are very much in line with what our projections are, which is good. But again, plugging those revenues into FY20 assumes that we're going to continue on with the pilot program, and that's something that we're going to have to make a decision on the next month or two.
The actual start date wasn't until
March.
I was going to say February, but
it was,
okay, so March.
Yeah, it went live in March.
So we won't have a full 12 months until next March.
Right, but we know what we've built out. We know that our collection rates of our peer communities are on, around 90%. And so while our collection rates right now are much lower than that, it generally takes a good amount of time to get everybody, all the billing squared away and to see those collection rates. But no indication that we wouldn't ultimately get to the numbers that we had projected based on.
What is lag time from actual billing to collection?
It can vary on the insurance carrier.
Is there an average, or?
Not at this stage in the game, especially.
All insurance companies might take 10 weeks to pay you. The government pays you. Well, the federal government pays you very quickly.
Right. So
Medicaid might take months to get it, depending on whether they say in the budget. And the major Harvard, Tufts, and Blue Cross would pay you in a relatively expeditious fashion within 5 weeks of getting billing. And I think that when they talk about the collection rate, they're talking about their charges versus what they collect.
Yep.
But they shouldn't be talking about that. There's a lot of contractual adjustments in there. So
no, it's not, no, I'm sorry. It's not. I'm sorry. It's more that what they collect.
I remember the presentation. They should be talking about their collection rate as a percentage of what they expect to get paid.
Correct.
Okay.
That's what we are.
Not what they would bill.
Not what they bill.
Right.
Correct.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it's what we expect to collect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
So it's net of any,
I understand. that.
Offsets,
So
that's
I don't
what
think they, anyway.
so I guess that's a question. That's what, we want to be sure that's what they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because otherwise, another number is
Right.
irrelevant.
Correct.
and would change
Dramatically.
and it would change things dramatically.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah,
Otherwise, you'd give them a big F. If they
yeah,
did.
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, just a minute.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
It's going to take them a while to get, it's going to take 8 months or so for them to establish what their collection rate is until all the money comes in from straggling insurance companies.
But for FY20, presumably, that lag will all be well behind us. So we can
Right,
count on those revenues
right.
in FY20. That's why FY19, we kept the number very low. For regional dispatch, that historically, over the past 5 years, has been deduction off our cherry sheet revenues of $82,000 a year and change based on our per capita rate of $1626 for being up at the Essex County Regional Emergency Communication Center. And now that State 911 is definitely taking over that program next July 1, as we've talked about, or maybe as we will be talking about, I should say.
It's a little further down.
A little further down. They, you know, the town will not have to pay any assessment starting in FY20. So at this stage, because the town hasn't made a decision, isn't in a position to make a decision yet relative to what our long-term answer is on regional dispatch for FY20, we've assumed that our assessment will drop off. So it's basically $82,000 additional in revenues, because net state aid will bump up from around a little over $200,000 to right around $300,000.
So to that, the cherry sheet revenues will change. But if I understood the presentation, there are some additional costs to the town that would remain,
Correct.
no matter whether it's state 911 or,
Yeah,
Right.
those costs have been absorbed back by the fire and police departments on the order of $15,000 or so over the past few fiscal years, and those would continue to be paid by the departments.
so it's not zero. We're not paying zero. I just want to, people think this is zero. And it's not a lot.
Right.
But it's somewhat discretionary. Could change. We don't have a commitment that that kind of expense wouldn't continue or grow. We just
No,
know the operating, at least.
Yeah, no,
Right?
I think that was an issue where different services were promised to different communities. It wasn't clear in the IMA. Once we, you know, were in operation for a number of years, there was a recognition that different communities were getting different services, but paying the same per capita fee. So I think I would not expect anything new on that, because there was kind of a full reconciliation of what was different.
Oh, that's right.
And then
Yeah.
everybody kind of had to absorb those costs back into our departmental budgets. So I wouldn't expect anything new from that, but that's,
Yeah,
and we can get into it
right,
more when
that's
we
it.
talk about
Right.
the
Okay,
draft IMA.
got it.
And I think the last thing, yeah, on the revenue side is that the reserve for abatement line has been increased by $40,000 from $135,000 where it's been historically to $175,000. And that's mainly to cover what we project in an increased need in funds to account for the expansion of the senior circuit tax breaker program. Which was approved by town meeting last spring to be put on the ballot this coming spring, and would expand eligibility for that property tax relief program about tenfold. There are 8 or 10 residents who are eligible and take advantage of it now, and we're going to be mirroring the same eligibility standards that the state has in place. And over the past 5 to 10 years, we've seen anywhere from 70 to 90 residents eligible for the state program. So we think it's going to be something on the order of that, hence the increase, because that's the funding source.
I think the increments were like $40,000,
That's what we're projecting
just the
right now.
difference between 135 and 175.
Yeah, and I think
Seems like a lot.
that's actually assuming that the 135 is a conservative figure. I think we're probably going to see on the order of more like $50,000 to $60,000.
I mean, the 175 is conservative.
The $135,000 was conservative. That there was some capacity in there to absorb some of the increase within the existing overlay.
But you're moving it from 130, they're moving it from 135 to 175. That's not what you said.
That's.
So you're saying that the increment is mostly or solely the result of the senior, okay.
Yep.
They're probably also going to be giving more abatements out this year, since they haven't moved anything in 5 years either, so.
All right, but this is FY20 we're talking about, not 19. So that'll be out of FY19 abatement, although it's all one bucket now, right? It used to be, before the Municipal Modernization Act, the reserve for abatements were tied back to a fiscal year. Now it's aggregated. So.
Yeah.
So that's the revenue side. On the expense side, as I referenced at a high level, there is $123,000 in new expense requests that would support adding additional staffing to various departments. And then there's tied to 2 of those positions, which would be benefited positions. We have increased the health insurance line item by $32,000, which is kind of the medium family plan cost to the town for the premium benefits for those 2 new employees. So about $155,000 total in new staffing costs, and we'll get into some detail on that in a minute. There's, as I mentioned, there are some increases, proposed increases in compensation for a number of positions above COLA, separate from merit increases. Those total $15,000. And then there's several expense increases, which total $68,000. And would it be helpful to go through each of the proposed items at this point? The board so inclined?
Only if we have an opinion on any of them that we'd like to share tonight.
I'll pass.
Same.
So, in order to try to move forward with a budget proposal, I think it would be helpful to get some direction from the board on a prioritization. I mean, I don't think that the department heads, I know that the department heads don't have the expectation that all of these requests are necessarily going to be supported by the board and the finance committee for FY20. But certainly before the finance committee begins their process working with the department heads, it would be helpful to hear back from the board on which of the staffing proposals, I think in particular, the board sees as more of a priority for next fiscal year, which ones we may want to hold for following fiscal years, what ones you need some supplemental information on, and so forth.
Well, I have an opinion on that. Excuse me.
Go ahead. I was going to ask
I
you
thought
what
the presentations
your opinion
were.
was. I was going to ask you what your guys' opinion was.
I think they made excellent presentations. I think that my suggestion is that we mirror the annual review of your goals and come up with a grid. You know, police, want to add another full-time officer. Highway department wants this, and assessors want that. And maybe we can grade them 1 to 10, and we can send them off to you. And that, we can check a box off. I'm just trying to make it simple as opposed to have.
And put a value next to him as well, a cost
Well,
next to him.
hopefully, Peter will have, okay, the police are asking for X, that cost us Y, and
Yes.
that, where do we rate that? Do we rate it high, low, medium? And actually, it has to be on its own, plus compared to somebody else. You need something that's other than just us gabbing away here.
You're right.
Otherwise,
That's
we
right.
can,
So that would be something Peter would send us.
yeah,
We would send back to him our individual
yeah.
grading. I really think it's grading. If there are 9 things, I think it's 1 through 9. Because otherwise you could have
Yeah,
some
well,
3 or 4 highs.
prioritizing, what
and
is going
then-
to,
He can then report back.
Then you can accumulate that, and then we can have a discussion about it at a meeting. But all has to
I'm
happen.
just trying to make it so that we
Yeah.
otherwise we're just going to, dribble through this and, and I want to think about it some more too. And that I think it would be helpful if I saw the numbers on a piece of paper. And, if I had to say, I'm rating it as importance, both to the fact that we have It's not that we have $500,000 under the levy limit we can spend.
Right.
We're in trouble here. But how important is that relative to its own merits and relative to the merits of the other?
Bigger picture, yeah.
Bigger picture and
Yeah.
relative to the other presentations that were made.
Agreed, yeah.
So I think the question there is timing. The selectmen, you're meeting next Tuesday. I don't think Jack's going to be available for that meeting. And the following meeting would be January 8th.
But I could still, I could fill out the form and send it to you if you,
Yep.
That would be good.
I mean, just, I don't have to be here to.
Just wouldn't be here for the,
For the
we'd have to
discussion.
postpone the
You
discussion.
may not be able to get it done between now and next Tuesday anyway, so he has to put it together, you have to send it to us, we have to send it back, he has to think about it. And that, some of these, although I was impressed with almost all the presentations, I need to go back and think about, am I still impressed in terms of money, given the fact that we're in a hole here?
And I think one of the elements that would be helpful is we've tried to provide a fair amount of backup data and information in your budget books. If there are other questions that you have as you go through those and trying to rank them, will let us know so we can get the information and get it out to everybody at the same time so that everybody's looking at the same
So I have a
thing.
general request on that, and I haven't been through every page of the budget book, full disclosure. But I would have liked, on a couple of the pages that I looked at, to see more actuals in the past. So the roll-ups, I now see have actuals for the last years that we can actuals. But some of the backup information had year over year, but it was budget to budget. It seems to me, if that's the case, I would just request that we have actuals. And it might not be the case. I might be thinking about the original, some original pages that we saw. But to me, to compare budget over budget isn't really that helpful.
Yeah, and generally, the last tab, which is the summary tab for each department, has prior actuals, 19 budget, 20 submitted.
At the very highest level.
At the
Right.
very, very highest
So I'm
level.
going to
But-
have to look through, because
but-
there were just a couple of line items that I thought would be useful to see, that increased, that would be useful to see the actuals to justify the increase. But I'll get back to you on what those specifically are, because it wasn't an overall, every page in the book kind of thing.
Okay.
The other big picture thing that I feel like maybe we should just touch on, assuming we've agreed on this plan with the chart and all of that.
I have one addendum to that. This picture may change, the picture you're describing, that overall, based on when is the school's going to tell us again?
Yeah, that's the
Preliminary.
difficult part, is the superintendent's recommended budget. We will have either Wednesday, the 19th, or Thursday morning, the 20th.
That's going to be very important to get, because we could have a surprise here that our unaffordability for the overall request could escalate, and so we may be in a, I don't want to predict this, but
Could be in a deeper hole.
I don't disagree, but I think some of the feedback that we heard from the board is that the town departments have, for the past several years, been trying to make their departments work within the levy limit. I think it's worth having a conversation about everything that's been proposed, independent in some ways of what the school assessment increases.
Absolutely.
which we did last year, and they did, or the year before, so I mean,
It
we
gives
can still,
credence to your departments. I agree with that.
I think it's an important number to just.
Of course.
And that we can still say, look, we're going to put, I'm making this up, 2.5% in there, and that's it. And that, but that's not, anyway, I think it's important to understand what they want.
I agree with you, Jack. I also agree with Peter. I think from a policy point of view, we have to decide what we need to do for the town. And if we're going to take into account the schools, or if we're just going to say, we've assumed, whatever, 3%, and that's what it is, and anything above
Being
that.
aspirational for 2.5.
Well,
I
yeah,
know it was
no,
3, but
whatever the number is, whatever we've assumed.
And the 3%'s just a plug.
But,
I mean,
well, it's a philosophical thing. That, the question is, of course, we're going to take it into account, But to the extent that the town budget is going to go up, are we going to constrain what we think its priority should be, so that the school budget can go up what they think its priority to be? Should we be absorbing that? And I think we've started a precedent of
The
not
philosophical
absorbing
question
it.
we've dealt with forever.
Well, but last year was, I think, the first year in my recent recollection where
Right.
we have said, okay, you need this much more money, go for it. It's a school, go for it. And we haven't tried to cut the town's
Right.
request. And I think that's the question. Are we still, is that
Well, I
where
think
we're
we can
still going?
we can still follow the suggestion I made 10 minutes ago, and get that going, and get the feedback to Peter, separate and apart from a discussion on the school budget, whether it's come high, low, it's going to be within the what we had projected, et cetera, et cetera. But nevertheless, we're still going to need to know what it is.
Totally.
That's all.
And we will. So the other, I guess, philosophical thing that I don't think we can bring up too early is that there's a possibility, always. Well, we have a problem now with these requests that we're going to be $450,000 potentially at the maximum if we approved everything above the levy limit. But there is a possibility that we'll be above the levy limit without making cuts, or without approving any or very many of these,
Well, yeah.
right? So that override word comes up, and I'm not saying that we're going to make a decision about that tonight, but it would be good to begin to get a sense of whether, as a board, we would even contemplate a town override in order to either accommodate the level services or level services plus whatever priorities we think.
It's an important question, you're right. But I think I would need to know, okay, do we agree that, I'm picking one of these requests out, the highway department, the police department, the combined amount of money they're looking for is $28,000, and we don't want to cut $28,000 someplace else. Are we willing to ask for, what is going to be in the ask of that? So that's going to,
Yes.
so we need to know, and this is what we're going to have to explain if we went that way.
But I guess my question is more generic. If we, and it's theoretical at this point, if we get to this point in this budget where we cannot fund level services under the levy limit,
Yeah.
are we going to say, do we think, we need to think about, are we going to say to Peter, okay, cut, because we're not going to accept anything over the levy limit, or are we going to contemplate an override? Assuming it's not so small that we could cut something inconsequential. Do you know what I mean? Just in
Yes,
philosophically.
but I think we'd also have to have that discussion with the finance committee, because the finance committee is making the report to the
Well,
town.
we set the policy. I mean, if we said,
The finance committee, you and I both were chairman.
I know,
They're
and
going to
we-
make a report to the town in that, hopefully we all agree, as we have in past years, but what goes in the budget book on the warrant article is the finance committee's recommendation. We can vote, we all agree, we don't agree, whether it's unanimous or 2-1 or 1, whatever it is, but it's their report in there, so that we have to be, we have to understand where their thoughts are on that question.
But I also think that when the board, when the finance committee starts its process, I think it'll be helpful for them to have some general policy direction from this board in terms of what Catherine's talking about. Is an operating override to fund level services on the table or not, in the board's opinion?
because if it isn't at all in ours, then they can make a
Nothing wrong with
recommendation,
that.
they're setting themselves up to be voted against. So,
It's just, there's a basis to touch here, that's all I'm trying to say.
yeah.
I think if there's more information, as Jack requested, on the personnel issues, I think that would help us, better look at the bigger picture.
And shifting gears just a little bit.
It's going to be a difficult
To
year.
talk about capital.
Yeah.
We have about $50,000 in FY20 capital requests that are prior year commitments that we have an obligation to pay.
And those are,
So,
Some things?
yeah, all three of them are annual lease payments for lease-to-own agreements that have been funded from free cash in prior years. But going back to certified free cash from FY18, we don't have that as a funding source available for capital next year. So those have to be absorbed by the operating budget. We don't have a choice. In addition to that, there's another $187,000 in capital requests that is included in that $425,000 total that we don't have a funding source for this year. So, you know, talking about an operating override, I think we'd have to look at that capital list and be strategic about what would be included in an operating override versus a potential debt exclusion for some of the more significant capital items that we have proposed, and for at least one of them, the new backhoe, another 4-year lease agreement. You know, that's something where a debt exclusion might make more sense for
Yeah, I
something
think
like
that's
that.
a worthwhile conversation to have at some point.
I get the sense that, you know, I think prioritization would be helpful, not just for what's proposed for the staffing and expense increases, but for capital.
Yeah.
So I'd suggest the same matrix.
Yeah, well, anything we can do with debt exclusion, I'm ready to put my hand up right now and say, great. I mean, you know, that's a no-brainer. Let's do a debt exclusion, and it doesn't fool the levy limit. So that whether it's, you know, 80,000 or 50,000 or whatever. I don't know how you two feel about that, but you know.
Well, for things that are large capital items that are going to be around for a while, like
it's a capital,
like the truck,
Yeah.
I think it does make some sense. We've been able to accommodate some of them as leases, and that's nice because, you know, get it done in 5 years. But I think we may have exceeded the ability to do that.
but if we can capitalize something and have a debt exclusion,
I
yeah.
totally agree. Totally agree. And I think that these are questions that we'd have to ask, but I think we have capacity to take out debt,
Yes.
and we're not talking millions of dollars here.
Right.
So viewing things from short term is day-to-day important, but the long vision, you know, well, is this just going to happen this year, or is this going to happen long-term, repeatedly?
And that's something that I think it's important to look at our 5-year capital plan,
Yes.
for the
Correct.
board to look at our 5-year
That's right.
capital plan, for all of us to do that.
Yep.
If we are going to be considering debt exclusions, and maybe it's something, you know, and looking at our debt schedules, I know there is some debt that's going to be dropping off in the next few fiscal years that will give us some additional capacity, whether it's on the tax rate, you know, within the levy limit or excluded debt.
And there may be some revenue coming in from some of these developments that we don't currently have.
Well, we've included, you know, we have increased new growth to accommodate for some of that, but at this point, it's a little early on with both of those projects to really count on those revenues. That's something we probably for FY21 would have some more
Well,
certainty
that's
on.
indicating that, you know, maybe we need to tighten ourselves a little bit now, looking ahead, saying, well, these will come online, but not immediately.
I think that we would have all of the facts, the necessary facts to answer the question we've been talking about 3 weeks to a month from now, 3 to 4 weeks from now.
I don't disagree with that. I just think that,
I think 4 weeks on the nose, January 8th.
right.
Is probably,
when-
yeah, I think we'll, you know, we'll know where the schools end up. We'll obviously know where our new growth number is. And.
It's a big deal.
Right.
It's a moving target, it has
Right.
been the last week, so I'd like to see it not moving.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we should, though, I think, proceed with prioritization in advance of
We can
that.
do that right now. I mean, you know,
I think it positions, you know, us well to be able to have those conversations, because I don't think it is going to be as black and white in some ways as last year.
No, I don't think so either.
Because I think it's going to be just as much about talking about our ability to fund level services on the town side, just level services,
That's what I'm concerned about.
as anything else.
Yeah.
And if that's on the table, I've said it before, I'm going to say it again, you know, I think we should really give consideration to how much we're relying on free cash to fund the operating budget, because that's one-time money, and we the trend is down on free cash. That's, DOR very specifically says you shouldn't, be using free cash to fund your operating budget. That's whatever the opposite of a best practice is. And so I think if we're having a conversation about an operating override to fund, let's say, level services for the town, I think we should also look at decreasing the extent to which we have free cash built into the revenue side in terms of a local receipt.
Interpreted to be asking for an override in excess of what we need this year to fund that budget, but to build capacity so that in the future we don't have to use free cash.
I think it's the equivalent of saying we're not going to zero out, not quite, but effectively zero out free cash.
Yeah.
In order to
Right.
ask for an operating override, if we know that doing so is going to put us in a position to, out of the gate, need an operating override the following year.
Right.
I think that is something, hopefully, that town meeting can understand and support. If that's what's going to be on the table, and I'm not saying we're there yet, but I think if we are, we have to have the discussion.
Okay.
Got it.
Well, I'm not sure I know what you mean, but our free cash has come in anywhere between $800,000 and $1 million, right?
No, it's been almost 1.4 3 years ago. It went down to a little over 1.2 last year. It's down under $1 million this year, and it's trending down because.
Well, so $800,000 to $1 million is in the ballpark, okay? But nevertheless, we've been spending the majority of that money every single year.
Correct, but we've been spending it to fund the operating budget and to pay for capital. And this year will be our lowest starting point that we've had in terms of rolling over a free cash balance.
But we're going to spend some of that for either capital or the operating, but otherwise we'd be having millions of dollars in free cash.
Absolutely.
Right.
I'm saying I think it should be used to fund our capital needs.
Okay.
But not necessarily to fund the operating budget, or certainly not to the extent that we have.
Yeah, okay.
So we historically, prior to 5 fiscal years ago, the town had used $300,000 to $400,000 of free cash from the prior year to subsidize the tax rate. It wasn't a levy capacity issue, it was bringing the tax rate down.
Right.
But that money has been now built in as a revenue source and increased. And so before we were using it to bring the tax rate down, now we're just using it to balance the budget. And so that's what I think we need to try to get away from, because we had the excess levy capacity in those prior years, and our reliance was a lot lower. I think at the very least, we should go back to something on the order of $300,000 or $400,000 of free cash at most.
See if we can live with that.
Right.
How do we live with that?
Yeah, lots of questions, lots of policy decisions coming up.
I see what you're saying. Our vantage point is different today than it was 4 or 5 years ago.
Well, as he has just described, we'd use it to lower the tax rate. And
Right.
now we're using it because,
Pay for the budget.
right.
Right, which is a definite uncomfortable.
And now we're running out of room to do that.
Right.
Can I just ask you, these pages, are they replacement pages?
Those are all replacement pages.
So
You've got a
these-
cover sheet that summarizes what they are and where they go.
Okay, got it.
But those, that's all what's new and different to go into your budget book, based on issues that were raised at the budget meeting, things that were, there's no substantive
Six.
So it'll be
policy
one out,
decisions in
one in,
there.
or something.
Correct.
like that.
Yep.
This, and so,
Another suggestion, Susan.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I think it'd be helpful for Peter to come up with just a one-pager. Here are the policy decisions we need to make, as the Japanese say, mohiki tik, quickly. And that all the things we just talked about in the last 20 minutes.
sure.
Prioritization of this, levy limit, level funding, all of these things. And so when we have it in front of us, when we begin this discussion with the January 8th or whatever it is going to be, we don't have to remember our discussion tonight.
Sure.
Just bullet points I'm
Yep,
talking about.
Yeah, sure.
It would be helpful just to be reminded, oh, wait a minute, we haven't talked about this one. And some of these have interdependencies as well.
Yes, they do. And this update that you gave us in the packet actually updates this information as well. This is the latest.
Correct.
Right.
It does, yeah. It's,
Well, I put mine back in the book, and I'm taking this home instead of the other.
Yeah. thankfully, thank you, they have dates on them. They might someday need to have dates on times, but there's 12/6 and there's 12/10,
Yep.
so on the roll-up. Okay, so we have a tentative plan. Oh, we have a plan. We'll see where it goes. Okay. Anything else about the budget anyone wants to talk about tonight? If not, we will move on to,
I keep dribbling these out. By the way, I meant to compliment you and your staff for the budget meeting we had a week from ago Saturday. I think that it would be helpful if Peter, somebody could talk, Peter probably, talk to Alex to find out, okay, he sat through all of this, and he has the same, you've given him this stuff too, right?
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, so he's gonna have all the raw data we have. Any thoughts for you and your committee? Have they been chatting with each other? And are they just waiting to hear what we have to say, or do they have already come to some conclusions, or what is he thinking? You know, it'd be nice to know what they're thinking. If indeed they haven't thought that much about it, well, that's the answer. But
Yeah.
you know that. But it'd also be interesting to know if they thought there's been chit chat amongst them. You're not supposed to do that.
well, I don't think
I
there
don't want
have
the chit chat amongst them.
Other
They haven't
than-
had a meeting. They're not scheduled to have a meeting until mid-January at this point. But
Oh.
I certainly, as you know, each new data point comes out, we're making sure that Alex and the committee are, you know, being updated. They're getting the same updates to the budget books as everybody else. If there's substantive information relative to new growth or the school budget, that's making its way to the finance committee as well. So.
Okay, moving on.
Tip.
Okay.
Thank you.
That was a good discussion.
Yeah, it's a good start.
We got most of the questions.
Well, we got the questions out. That's always a good thing to start with. You can't answer them unless you know what they are,
That's
right?
it. Absolutely right.
Okay, and we've affirmed the fact that we need structure.
Yeah.
So that's good. The next thing that we have is a review of options to address resident/school tennis court needs. And Jack, that happens to be your,
Yeah, well, I don't know what you want me to do with that.
Well,
I
I
noticed I noticed in here it's the same presentation that was made last April. There's nothing new on that.
no, but I think
And
Peter
I
has
can't,
some,
how many people you want to invite
well, I
up
think
right
Peter
now?
has some updates.
I will.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this was last talked about at your May 1st selectmen meeting, if you can imagine that.
The height of the tennis season,
That's right.
It was.
for schools anyway.
So just as a very brief recap, 4 tennis courts at Pingree Park, open to the residents, used by the schools, by the tennis team. The schools early last spring deemed the courts unsafe and said that the team wasn't going to play on them. The team normally uses both the courts at Patton and at Pingree. And so the Recreation Department, I believe in March, engaged Gale Associates to look at the court conditions, do a full report. That's included in the packet, looking at cost estimates for short, medium, long-term fixes. And the findings from that report were about $80,000 for a short-term fix, which is going to last 3 to 5 years. Medium term, which is up to 10 years, would cost close to $200,000, and then long term, which would be 20+ years, which would essentially be starting from scratch, would be about $300,000 all in, including the soft costs for contract administration and engineering and so forth. And so from there, you know, obviously the conversation at the time, you know, the tennis team used the Tea House courts and the Patton courts last year to get through their season. And at the time, you know, we said the earliest that there would potentially be either fixed or new courts at Pingree would be next summer. Because we didn't have any funding in the budget, and it would either be CPA funds, debt exclusion, grant funding, some other funding source.
Private funding, whatever. Yeah.
Private fundraising, some combination,
Yeah.
all of the above. So I think there was a fair amount of back and forth about the resident need of tennis courts, and that's still
How to evaluate that?
difficult to, and certainly impossible to now that the courts are in the condition that they are, as was raised by a couple folks that night. You know, obviously, there are the courts at Patton just around the corner that are open to Wenham residents. The Tea House courts are also open to Wenham residents. So I think the initial sense was that a lot of the specific need for repairing or building new courts at Pingree was based on the school need, tennis team need. And so just by way of updates, for this coming spring, we were notified that the schools are not going to be using the WVIS courts, but they're, I'm pretty sure, going to be up at the Ipswich Country Club. They've made arrangements to use those courts up there, at least for this coming season and potentially going forward. And I also, although the superintendent's budget hasn't been released yet, I don't expect to see any recommended funding in the FY20 district budget for full or partial payment for new courts at Pingree. But that being said, the CPA application deadline here in Wenham, at least, is Monday, January 7th. And with that deadline looming, I thought it would be important to have a conversation around if there was any interest or support or perceived need to put in an application for the courts for this year, or whether we would wait and you know, look to gather some more information. The other piece that I should add is that we did try to work with Gordon College to get the tennis team on the courts last spring, and kind of longer term. They have an arrangement. Their team obviously uses them. Their teams use them a fair amount. When they're not being used, they have a long-standing arrangement with Landmark, where Landmark uses the courts, and they're pretty flexible. And so that would make it really not possible for the tennis team to use those courts. That being said, there is a possibility that Wenham residents could use those courts, and I'm meeting with some folks from Gordon later this week to understand exactly what that might look like in terms of access and fees, if any, and so forth. So I can give an update on that.
So it appears the schools are abandoning all of the Wenham and town tennis court.
Well, Wenham and
usage.
Hamilton, right? If they're going to Ipswich, they're not going to use Patton.
They're not planning to use Patton, at
Right.
least this coming year. They're planning, my understanding, again, secondhand, is that Ipswich Country Club has accommodations for the varsity and JV teams to you know, have their matches all in one location.
So we've got West Wenham, Tea House, so forth. They're walking away from it all.
Well,
That's unfortunate.
yeah, I mean, West
because
Wenham
they-
isn't usable, Pingree isn't usable, the Tea House certainly is.
Well, they're not usable if they don't participate and support it somehow.
Yeah,
financially.
and my understanding is that
Then to expect the town to pick up another predominantly used school program is, I think, is kind of unfair.
and I don't know that they have that expectation. They haven't communicated that expectation.
Well,
They've simply said that they're not planning to include any funding in next year's budget. And that they don't have, again, my understanding, any long-term plans to build any tennis courts on any of their campuses.
So
I mean, maybe-
I can't help but read into that just a little. We haven't heard it explicitly from the schools, but we have been asking, you know, they understand the situation. And the only thing we hear from them is, we have no plans for the schools to put any money towards this.
Right.
So I think we can read into it, since we're not getting an exact answer and we haven't seen the budget at the moment. I think we can read into the fact that at the moment, the school district is not inclined to participate in repair, replacement
And maybe there's
of
not a
town
demand
courts.
for this activity.
Well,
And if that is true, it'd be
Don't know.
nice if somebody would at least talk to us.
I don't know. I just think that
But I think you're
I
absolutely.
think
on
we
the-
have to assume the school, at least for now,
Yeah.
and maybe long-term, does not have a desire to participate with the town, either town, I guess.
Yeah, and I should say, just looking back at the email exchanges, it sounds like the school committee is going to be looking at their capital projects lists writ large at their meetings in January. And may, coming out of that process, decide that it is a priority for them. But if that's the case, we won't be putting in an application in for CPA funds, because that's after the deadline. So it would be then for the following year to go in at the absolute earliest the following summer. So we may hear back next month that the schools do think it's really important and want to make a financial contribution. But if that's the case, it wouldn't be until FY21.
Got it.
The Joint Rec runs the patent in Pingree, right? The tennis, recreational tennis. I know they were here in the presentation.
Yes.
So my question is, do they have statistics on either one?
That was my question.
No,
if
so
you remember,
they're
Jim.
not scheduled through their first come, first served. There's no.
When I played there years
booking.
ago with first come, first serve, I just wanted to.
Still.
Okay.
Yeah,
still, I think.
they're not
So
booked through the rec
They have
department.
no data.
No,
apparently.
they deal with upkeep and maintenance of the courts, but
Yeah,
not.
but how do you do that without data to say somebody ever uses it?
Well,
I mean,
with
we
the
know what they
school-
do at the pond.
Well, with the school using it, I think that they probably based their data, or when they did their upkeep based on the school's needs, and then didn't. But they weren't, I don't think they were scheduling maintenance, they couldn't be scheduling maintenance just on residents' need, because they don't know what
And it
that
doesn't-
is.
it-
And
whether
it's so
the-
overwhelming.
And generally speaking, on tennis courts, certainly the ones down at Pingree, if there's people playing tennis on the courts every day or once a month, that's not necessarily going to change what you would have to maintain on the courts. Maybe the surfacing would have to be done a little more frequently, but generally, everything's going to deteriorate at the same rate.
Age, I see what you're saying.
Whether it's
Yeah,
the
weather
fences or the
conditions.
base
Yeah.
or the,
Yeah.
anything else. It's not really going to change what they'd have to put into it.
It seems like the question for us at the moment is, are we interested in pursuing repair of the Pingree Park tennis courts now for recreational town purposes, relative, I guess, specifically to the CPC? I don't see it personally. I think we have to learn a lot more about, the school drives so much of that, we have to learn much more about their long-term plans. And I think we have some capacity to deal with, I don't see long lines of people, this is anecdotal, waiting for tennis, recreational tennis, and we do have the WVIS and Patton. I think it's a wait-and-see thing for us. and
Well,
we do.
there's a lot of potential spots here.
Yeah, and I think enough to
They're not in
handle
good
just.
condition anymore because there's just not
Well, but
somebody keeping data, nor somebody
the
paying attention.
WVIS and the patent courts are usable by Wenham residents, and they're in fine condition.
They
They're
are,
not
okay.
professional condition, but for recreational play. So it seems as if, at least for now, we can manage our capacity, we can manage our demand
Needs, yeah.
for recreational to the extent that we know it,
Okay.
without
I go by
Spending a lot of
I go by there frequently, so do you, because you live down that neck of the woods, and so does John, actually, and that, I make it a point, I have been ever since the May meeting, to, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, certainly on the weekends, and that most of the time when I go by, either nobody's using the WVAS courts, or there's one, I'll call it a couple, or one court is being used out of the 4. And so and this is anecdotal, not scientific, but I make it a point every time to see that. I don't see all 4 courts ever being used at the same time. Maybe somebody in the WVS who was there every single day might have it'd be interesting to find out if anybody there actually puts their head out and see if
Well,
who's
it
there.
is used by their the kids in the summer
Right.
program. So that is a
Other than that.
regular use, which is 10 weeks in the morning.
In the morning only.
Yeah, between 10 and 12.
And boy, they,
And that waxes and wanes depending on the year. But I think a CPA request we would hope that there was a similar CPA request for even Pingree Park courts, if they're going to be used by the schools, from Hamilton, as there often is. And I don't see coordinating all of that before January 7th,
And there's
for
certainly
sure.
precedent for, the playgrounds at Pingree and Patton for CPA grant applications to go in from both towns. And it's
Right.
been about 2 to 1, depending on, where the facility is located.
Right.
So if it's in
Right.
Wenham, it's been about 2 to 1 funding from our CPA versus Hamilton. But that's the model that's out there, that's the precedent. I know that when the CPC held their public hearing in November, I believe, that John Timmons was there to report out on a couple projects and did just basically shared out the information about the courts that's in your packet, just the report itself. And the fact that the board had talked about it, but didn't give any indication of whether we were definitely going to put in an application this year or not.
well, there you go.
Okay. We'll see if something changes, but I'm not really seeing it from a CPA point of view for this year. And a lot depends on what the school committee decides in their
I've been warned by
capital
one
plan.
member that,
Well,
there's not the appetite there for quote-unquote recreation, and certainly in the tennis courts, but it's only one member.
yeah, we don't know. We don't really know how they would vote, but if they don't have an application, it's up to us to decide
One
if there's an
person's sense of the
application.
committee, that's all I'm just
Right.
sharing.
Right. So, all right.
Who knows what I'm talking about?
Do we
Yep.
do
That's
that
clear
one?
enough. Yep.
Okay. The last item that we have on the agenda is a matter of old business, and it is a status update on the regional dispatch and a review of the proposed new intermunicipal agreement. What do you think about that?
Okay.
Well-
So this is on old business just because it was, we weren't able to get to it at the last meeting.
Oh, that's
It's
right.
not something we've actually talked about
I'm
in
reading
a
this
number of
thinking,
months.
wait, I know that
I
we've
think
talked
I
about
was the
this.
selectman who pro-offered to postpone it.
Maybe we'll have to stop putting it
I'm
at
gonna
the
take a little
end
break right
of
now,
the
so you can
meeting.
talk about all you want. I'll be right back.
Okay. So I'm,
I think we were driven by the fact that there's an expectation that the town would provide some input to a meeting.
Right.
so we're now up against the deadline. We are, the state has agreed to accept our comments,
Well, they have.
well, to accept them. I'm not
Except
sure
the
if to
comments.
take them
not
under
to-
advisement.
Yeah, exactly.
By the end of this week. So actually, the issue last time was other items on the agenda took a little longer than we thought, and we had another meeting to get to, which is why we had to cut it short. And the Finance Committee was trying to have their meeting too.
Right,
So it was,
right.
that was really the only reason why it wasn't taken up last week. So just to go through my memo on this very quickly, let's see, last month, about a month ago, we, State 911 sent their proposed intermunicipal agreement, new intermunicipal agreement that would govern the, what's now called the REC, what will be called the North Shore 911 Center next July 1. In spite of the fact that we had suggested when we met with the state originally in June and July, a couple things. One, we said, I think it's really important to get our input early on in the process. That didn't happen. It also took them 4 months to give us an initial draft, which was a lot longer than we were hoping for. And as I mentioned, I think the major selling point that they continue to focus on is the fact that they will fully subsidize all of the costs of providing this service to the community. So we'll see a reduction in costs from about $82,000 a year down to $0. And based on their proposed IMA, that would be the case for the next 10 years. But they, in talking to police chief and captain, fire chief and captain, in going through the draft myself, we've come up with a number of items that we have concerns about. And so I'll just go through those very quickly. I think there was always several advisory committees under the current IMA, but they have reduced their authority even more. They are really just advisory going forward for the participating members. That was, I think across the board, one of our major concerns with the state taking over the program when we first met with them was that we felt like it was going to be really important that we still have a seat at the table, and there was concern that if we weren't paying anything, then we wouldn't really have a say in how they were running the program, and that's certainly how the IMA as currently drafted reads. The initial term before withdrawal is set at 7 years. So we'd be locked in for 7 years. Just as a reference point, the original IMA that we're still working under right now, at least until the end of the fiscal year, was a 5-year initial term. Right. It was a 10-year agreement with a 5-year initial term, and then you could opt out. Under the current agreement, you you had to give 2 years notice before you opted out. Under the new agreement, it's 3 years. So it's an even longer window to give notice. And there's a lack of clarity on a number of different points. I think the general consensus was, understandably, this program was new to the Commonwealth, new to all of the participating members at the time. So the original IMA didn't get it quite right. Left a lot of discretion and gray area, but I think there have been a fair amount of lessons learned along the way where more specificity would have been helpful. And if anything, this IMA goes in the other direction. It's even more vague. So there's, just to tick through them, there's a lack of specificity about who owns the capital infrastructure, whether it's state 911 or the member communities. About who's responsible for equipment upkeep and any additional future capital costs.
That goes to my question earlier, by the way.
Yep. About the financial terms of withdrawal, can we just exit with no penalty? Do we have to pay for the amortized cost of any capital equipment? I don't know. No specificity on how much it would cost for new municipalities to join and what that would look like.
Oh, they haven't.
Nope. And they've, in the discussions that we had with them a few weeks ago, I believe they made a conscious decision because they want to leave that to their discretion. Mm-hmm. And certainly a major one operationally is there's reference to transitioning to a shared radio frequency. Right now, it's not really being run like a regional dispatch center. Everybody has their own channels. That was one of the things that was promised coming in the door. And I think regardless of whether the state would be taking over the program or not, shared frequencies is something that was identified by the audit. It's something that I think there is agreement is where we should be headed. But
please describe that again. A shared frequency means one frequency for for all towns to use.
For all the police departments, and all of would be on one frequency, and all of the fire departments would be on another frequency. Okay. Or maybe it's 2. They haven't really said. Okay. I think the concern is they're going to be, you would think, looking to reduce their level of subsidy. So the only way to do that is to reduce personnel. The way to do that is to push
Reduce
for
the cost of operation.
shared frequencies.
Somehow. Yep.
And, you know, I think that's something that is more easily accommodated on the fire side than on the police side. And I think generally our chiefs in particular, they're used to having a shared frequency. They had that with Hamilton for years. That was one of the selling points of going to the rec, was not having that. But I think, you know, if we were sharing a frequency with just Essex, I could see that being something we would work to over the next several years. But if it's, you know, 4, 5, if there are new members that add, if we're all on the same frequency, I think there are some legitimate public safety concerns for the officers and firefighters, if that's the case. They're right now, the rec, as of about 1.5 years ago, took on the reverse 911 service, and so that's a cost we actually dropped, and we dropped that service. So mention of that in the agreement. And then there are some more operational issues in terms of calling out to various departments and a limiting of what they would be providing as a service going forward under the new program. So I think at a high level, and just to clarify, this represents kind of the collective feedback that I've gotten from all of our public safety folks. So the challenge is we're going to be getting in our comments by the end of this week. All of the member communities agree to that timeline. Then we've asked for a prompt turnaround from State 911 in terms of what they'd be willing to have a conversation on, what's a non-starter. It's really hard to tell. I will say one thing that is a little interesting is that when we first opted into the rec, we had to go to town meeting for approval, and based on the Municipal Modernization Act and the changes to Chapter 40, Section 4A, that's not the case anymore. So it would just be a Board of Selectmen approval process to either stay in the rec and remain in that program, or to enter into a new IMA with either Hamilton or Danvers. So shifting gears a little bit on that, we've been working with MRI over the past several months now. They are a few weeks out, probably beginning of the next calendar year, on submitting their draft report to the town, looking at the feasibility of Danvers and Hamilton. One of the sticking points there is getting a projected grant amount back from State 911 for.
You don't want to help us figure out how to have an option?
For what the level of funding they would provide if we were in either Hamilton or Danvers, because State 911, that's their agency mission originally conceived,
right,
was they provided the grant funding to support these regional programs.
350 whatever.
Correct.
Yep.
And so not surprising that they haven't been terribly responsive. And that's obviously one of the major cost drivers, is understanding how much is it going to cost in Danvers and Hamilton, and how much is the state subsidy going to cover of that cost. And there's a
sort of know one.
Well, we would presume to. Well, we certainly know the recs, but we presume to know on the order of what Hamilton's would be. But it certainly may have changed. So I am efforting that as we speak, and will likely, when I send my comments in to State 911.
Okay, so you are preparing a letter to them regarding the concerns and desires.
Yeah, and it's essentially going to be a lot of what is covered in the memo.
Okay. How
Well,
soon?
who's you? Excuse me, is you collectively the 4 or 5 towns that are still in this, or is it you?
No, so what we do, yeah.
Good question.
Good question. So we are each going to submit our own individual
Okay.
collective,
Each
talking to
town.
our fire chief and police chief, each community is going to submit our own.
That's too bad, because if you're the only one complaining about something, I say, look, no one else complained, no, we just dismiss that, so.
Yeah, so I lobbied for what you're talking about, and it ended up that everybody was going it alone, because I think in fairness, the idea was different communities might have some different feedback on
Well,
some of the elements of the IMA.
When
certainly
will,
weakens your position, that's all I can tell you.
when will your letter be ready?
In the next day or two.
Okay. Is it possible to share that?
It's what's in the memo. There's nothing good that's
Oh,
going
you
to be.
mean in the book?
Yep.
In the
Yeah.
binder?
Yep, so there's not going to be anything new or different from that. The one other thing I should mention
Yep.
is that because of just where we are in the fiscal year, even if Hamilton or Danvers, if we knew today that was where we wanted to end up in terms of regional dispatch, we wouldn't be ready to go live next July 1.
All right.
Not feasible. So the one other thing that I'm going to be requesting on behalf of the town and the board is that there's an opt-out provision within the first 2 years of the new IMA, because otherwise
You're not leaving us enough time to.
there's not much of
Make
a
a
decision to be
reasonable
made.
decision.
Right.
We're locked in for 7 years, and we don't really have
Well, 7
much of a
years,
say.
7 years all by itself it to me seems a little excessive. 5 I can understand with a 2-year opt-out, I guess, at some point in time. But 7
Yeah,
is
that's
an
a long
odd
time.
number, and then it seems like it's a very long number.
Yeah, I mean, to Jack's point, though, I will say, almost every single point that's raised in my memo was brought up to the state 911 by chiefs and managers and mayors in each of the towns around the table when we met a couple weeks ago.
So you weren't unique.
No, not at all.
Probably, possibly more vocal.
Probably a little more.
Having read some of the minutes. So, having.
Okay, that's good.
It is good. He's been an amazing advocate. I've been reading the minutes of some of the meetings, the advisory meetings, and there's an awful lot of. Town Administrator Lombardi suggested that, Town Administrator. So, even if I hadn't read the proposed new IMA, which I have looked at, you and the chiefs, in my opinion, have the closest view of what it should be, and I would probably completely support everything, all of your concerns. Having read both IMAs, I definitely support these concerns. So from my point of view, thank you for writing the letter, and there's not one thing on here that you've identified that I wouldn't agree with. It's a big leap they're asking us, the member communities, to take into nothing, really, and nothing concrete.
Their trust.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think they're relying on, quite honestly, the fact that it's not going to cost us anything.
They're following the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules.
Yeah, right, and
Thank you, Jack. Exactly.
that's great. But as we know, and as the chiefs know, there's a whole lot more to good service than having it be free. And governance and all of those things. So I don't have a lot of confidence that they're going to take these comments and discuss them and incorporate them into a new IMA, but they will at least have heard the comments.
Yeah, I think
And
the
then we
most
can
important one
decide.
for us is the opt-out provision.
Absolutely. That's almost a non-starter.
It would be nice if your colleagues in the other towns sent you drafts of what they were going to send in. So to the extent that you all had agreed on a point you might have put together with somebody else, that was somebody took the lazy approach and only sent in a page and a half as opposed to 9 pages, and they didn't have this, although they previously agreed with your concern, but it's not expressed in their written report, it just weakens,
Yeah.
all of them, and it weakens our report.
Don't worry, Jack, I'm not going to write a 9-page letter.
I'm just,
Yeah, I know.
but if you feel strongly about something, you thought you had a buy-in by your colleagues, and now it's only one other person has it in there, it just weakens
Right.
your position.
And you don't know what politically has happened in the other towns
Right.
between the time you met and had those comments.
Yeah, and for what it's worth,
No.
Amesbury, that had already given notice that they were going to be leaving by next July 1, was interestingly back at the table at this last meeting for the first time in about a year.
Seems like there was some
Zero
political
is attractive.
issues there, well, or
Hard to say where they're going to end up. I certainly wouldn't count on
following
them staying
Amesbury a
in.
little bit, right?
There are a lot of concerns that have been raised by their fire and police departments that would be difficult to get around at this point.
Which is why they opted out
Right.
initially. Okay, so you've got a letter to write.
Right.
I'd like to make a vote, good luck.
Yeah, I think
I'll second
I think
that.
he knows that we have a consensus support. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
For his- for-
Okay.
Okay, anything else anyone has? If not, I will
Nope.
take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Adjourn.
Pizza.
Good night, all.
There are a few things.